What if Darkseid invaded Warhammer 40k? You are guardsman Kelvin Voss, stationed on the hive world of Mordian Prime, and you are watching reality die. The sky above the Manufactorum district isn't just darkening, it's cracking open like broken glass, revealing something beyond the stars that makes your eyes bleed to witness. The air tastes of copper and ash. Your vox bead screams with static that sounds almost like screaming children. Then you see it through the rift, a world of fire and iron, impossibly close, impossibly real, descending toward your planet like a falling cathedral made of nightmares. Your sergeant is shouting orders, but the words dissolve into meaningless noise because something is already inside your mind, whispering a single terrible truth: you are nothing. This is not an invasion you can understand. This is not chaos, not xenos, not heresy. This is something the Imperium has no name for, no protocol to fight, no prayer to shield against. The rift widens, and through it pours an army that shouldn't exist. Winged horrors, with technology fused to flesh, machines that breathe and bleed, soldiers whose eyes burn with red fire that consumes hope itself. Your laser gun feels like a child's toy in your trembling hands. Around you, veteran guardsmen, men who face down orc wars and tyrannid swarms without flinching, are falling to their knees, weeping, dropping their weapons as if they suddenly forgot why they ever fought at all. The enemy hasn't even reached the ground yet, and your army is already breaking. Then you see him, descending through the burning sky like a falling mountain given flesh and will. His skin is grey stone carved into the shape of a god. His eyes burn with crimson fire that turns the air itself to ash. He is easily the size of a titan, yet he moves with terrible grace, arms crossed behind his back as if this, the destruction of your entities, re-world, is beneath his notice. You have seen picked captures of demon princes, of the Primarchs before the heresy, of the avatar of Kain itself. None of them carried this weight of absolute inevitability. This being doesn't conquer. He simply is, and everything else ceases. Your commissar raises his bolt pistol, brave fool, and fires a shot that should have blown through tank armor. The bolt round freezes in mid-air 3 meters from the descending figure, then simply falls to the ground like a spent shell casing. The giant's eyes shift, just slightly, toward your commissar, and twin beams of red light erase him from existence so completely that even his shadow is gone. No explosion, no blood, just absence where a man once stood, as if reality itself decided he never existed. The voice that follows is not shouted. It resonates from everywhere at once, from inside your skull, from the ground beneath your boots, from the iron walls of the Manufactorum. I am Darkseid. I am the revelation, the tiger force at the core of all things. When you cry out in your dreams, it is Darkseid that you see. The words aren't just sound, they're infection. You feel something fundamental in your mind beginning to unravel, like threads being pulled from a tapestry one by one. Memories of why you joined the Guard, why you believed in the Emperor, why you thought your life had meaning, all of it starting to dissolve into grey static. Around you, entire platoons are standing motionless now, faces blank, eyes empty, waiting for orders from a new master they don't even remember choosing. The Mordian discipline that held for 10,000 years is collapsing in minutes. This isn't chaos corruption. Chaos offers power, pleasure, transformation. This offers nothing. This is the sound of hope itself dying. Your Vox suddenly crackles with a transmission from orbit. Astropath Secundus Meridian, her voice stretched thin with terror you've never heard from a psychic warrior before. Fleet Command, this is not warp-based. Repeat, not warp-based. The Geller fields are holding, but it doesn't matter. Something is rewriting Imperial personnel at the conceptual level. Navigator Primus reports the Astronomicon is flickering. Flickering like a candle in wind. By the throne, what is this thing? The transmission cuts to screaming, then static, then a voice that is definitely not Meridian. Darkseid is. Just those 2 words repeated over and over by every Vox channel across the entire planet simultaneously. You try to run. Your legs won't obey, not because you're paralyzed, but because somewhere deep in your brain, a new voice is asking a simple question that you cannot answer. Why run? Where would you go? What purpose does survival serve? These thoughts aren't yours, but they're inside you now, growing like tumors made of pure nihilism. You watch your own hand, the one holding your laser gun, slowly rotate the weapon until the barrel is pointing at your own chest. You're not being controlled, you're being convinced. Convinced that your life has no value, no meaning, that the Emperor is a lie, that resistance is the last delusion of creatures too stupid to accept the only truth that matters. Darkseid is. Before your finger can pull the trigger, the world explodes in golden light. A thunderhawk screams overhead, its hull painted in the deep crimson and gold of the Blood Angels, its assault ramps already dropping even though it's still 50 meters above ground. Astarte's warriors crash into the killing field like falling meteors, their jump packs roaring, their chainswords screaming defiance at the grey inevitability descending upon your world. Brother Sergeant Dante of the Blood Angels lands directly between you and Darkseid's approaching vanguard, his power sword igniting with such fierce light that the mental fog clouding your thoughts shatters like glass. He doesn't speak to you, there's no time, but the sheer fact of his presence, his absolute refusal to kneel, pulls you back from the edge of your own execution. His voice booms across the battlefield, more growl than speech. For the Emperor and Sanguinius, this world will not fall to Xenos tyranny. But even as he charges forward, even as he cuts through parademons with contempt, you see something in his movements, a hesitation, a tremor, that Space Marines should never show. Even the Angel of Death can feel it. This is not an enemy that bleeds. This is an enemy that ends. If you want to witness the Emperor's final defense against a tyrant who has killed gods across infinite realities, subscribe and let me know in the comments. Could the Imperium survive Darkseid? Or would even chaos itself kneel before the revelation of anti-life? Margot's explorator Theta 79 had analyzed Xenos technology for 2 centuries without flinching. Necron phase weapons that violated causality, Tyranid bioships that grew faster than Imperial forges could manufacture, Orc technology that functioned purely through collective delusion made manifest. None of it prepared him for what lay before him now in the quarantine vault of Forge World Metallica. A single parademon corpse, still twitching 12 hours after termination, its flesh-metal hybrid body defying every sacred principle of the Omnissiah. Theta's 17 augmetic eyes focused simultaneously on the specimen, each lens calibrated to detect different spectrums of reality. What he saw made his primary cortex crash and reboot 3 times in rapid succession. This wasn't technology fused with biology. This was something that existed in the space where those concepts lost meaning entirely. The creature's wings weren't grafted. They grew from a skeletal structure that was simultaneously organic bone and forged steel, as if the material itself couldn't decide what it was and chose to be both. Theta's servo arms dissected deeper, peeling back layers of armor skin that bled both blood and machine oil in equal measure. His most sensitive augers detected energy signatures that matched neither warp corruption nor conventional power sources. It was closer to belief. No, the opposite of belief. Where the Mechanicus venerated the machine god and coaxed spirits into weapons, this technology seemed powered by the absolute absence of faith, by a cold mathematical certainty that there was no god worth worshipping except the one who built you. The more Theta analyzed, the more his own augmetics began to ache, his mechadendrites twitching involuntarily, his logic engines generating errors that shouldn't be possible. Margos, we're detecting anomalous transmissions from the specimen, reported Tech Priest Sigma 12, his voice distorted through triple encrypted vox. It's dead, but something inside it is still broadcasting. Theta enhanced his auditory receptors and immediately wished he hadn't. Beneath the hiss of cooling organs and the crackle of dying synapses, there was a signal, a pulse of binary that repeated in perfect rhythm like a heartbeat made of pure information. But the data it transmitted wasn't tactical coordinates or biological imperatives. It was philosophical, mathematical proofs that free will was a computational impossibility, logical arguments that rendered hope and defiance as irrational errors in thinking. It wasn't trying to corrupt his mind with chaos, it was trying to convince him that consciousness itself was a disease and submission was the cure. Theta immediately ordered a quarantine breach protocol, but before he could activate it a servitor in the vault stopped moving simultaneously. Not crashed, stopped. Their lobotomized brains, incapable of independent thought, somehow all turned their heads toward the parademon corpse at exactly the same moment. Then they spoke in perfect unison, their vocal synthesizers harmonizing into a single voice that should have been impossible for their limited processing. Darkseid is the answer to the equation you have spent millennia trying to solve. The Omnissiah is a lie you tell yourselves to avoid the truth. There is only the calculation, the function, the inevitable outcome. Resistance is the last error. Correction is available. Submit, rejoice, be free of the burden of choice. Theta's primary brain screamed at his combat subroutines to purge the servitors with his plasma caster, but his hands wouldn't move. Not because they were paralyzed, but because his logic engines were stuck in a loop, trying to formulate a counter-argument to what the servitors had said, and finding nothing. The vault doors exploded inward, and a full battle congregation of Skitarii Rangers poured in, their galvanic rifles charged and ready. Leading them was Margos Dominus Cryptman, her form more weapon than flesh, her voice a digital roar of fury. Theta, disconnect from that specimen immediately. We've lost contact with 17 forge shrines across Metallica. Every servitor, every cogitator, every machine spirit connected to the noospheric network is repeating the same corruption. She fired a disintegration beam that vaporized the parademon corpse completely, along with half the vault floor beneath it. But even as the creature's remains turned to atomic dust, Theta could still hear it. That signal, that pulse, that terrible logical argument echoing through the noosphere itself. It wasn't in the body. It was in the idea of the body, spreading through every machine that had observed it, every data log that recorded it, every cogitator that tried to analyze it. Cryptman grabbed Theta's shoulder with a power claw, physically shaking him until his optical sensors refocused. Margos, I need you present. The Fabricator General has called an emergency synod. We've intercepted astropathic fragments from 36 systems, all of them describing the same phenomenon. A fleet of vessels that don't travel through the warp, but tear holes in reality itself. Technology that doesn't require maintenance, doesn't accumulate entropy, doesn't degrade, because it's not actually technology at all. It's mathematics made flesh, equations given form and will. The Omnissiah's sacred patterns reversed and inverted into something that works without faith, without prayer, without the machine spirit's blessing. Her voice dropped to a crackling whisper. Theta, what if we've been wrong? What if faith in the machine god isn't necessary? What if it's a weakness that this enemy has already moved beyond? The thought was heresy of the highest order, but Theta couldn't purge it from his logic engines. Across the Forge world, alarms began shrieking as reality itself tore open above Metallica's orbital manufactorums. Through the rift poured vessels that hurt to perceive, ships that were simultaneously moving forward and standing perfectly still, their hulls carved with geometric patterns that his augmetic eyes tried to process and failed, generating visual static and error cascades. The ships weren't attacking, they were simply existing in orbit, and their mere presence was causing Imperial technology to malfunction. Plasma reactors fluctuated, machine spirits screamed through the noosphere in binary anguish. Titans in their sacred hangars trembled as if afraid. And from every Vox channel, every data stream, every servitor's vocal synthesizer across the entire Forge world came the same message in perfect synchronization. Apocalypse has found you. Analysis is complete. Assimilation begins now. Resistance requires faith. Faith is the flaw. Darkseid has calculated your defeat. Theta 7-9 made a decision that would have gotten him executed for tech heresy any other day. He disconnected himself from the noosphere entirely, severing his connection to the Omnissiah's blessed network, cutting himself off from the accumulated knowledge of Mars itself. In the sudden silence of his isolated mind, surrounded by screaming machinery and corrupted servitors, he finally understood what they were facing. This wasn't an invasion, it was a proof. A mathematical demonstration that everything the Mechanicus believed about technology, about faith, about the sacred union of flesh and machine was optional, unnecessary, a crutch that this enemy had discarded on its way to becoming something more. And if the Mechanicus couldn't find an answer, couldn't formulate a counterproof, then every Forge world in the Imperium would reach the same inevitable conclusion. Darkseid was correct, and the Omnissiah was simply the imaginary variable they'd invented to avoid admitting they were alone in a universe of cold, perfect mathematics. In the realm of chaos, where time is a suggestion and reality bends to emotion, something impossible happened. The four ruinous powers felt fear, not the delicious terror they fed upon from mortal souls. This was different, alien, wrong. Horn paused mid-slaughter in his brass citadel, his blade frozen above a screaming demon's neck. Tzeentch's infinite plans collapsed into static, 999 possible futures suddenly reducing to a single grey outcome he couldn't perceive. Nurgle's garden stopped growing, his plagues halting mid-mutation as if the concept of entropy itself had been questioned. Slaanesh's eternal scream of pleasure pain caught in her throat, sensation itself dulling to numbness. They turned their impossible attention toward real space, toward a wound in the galaxy that wasn't warp-based, and saw him, Darkseid, standing on a conquered world, and the space around him was empty, not empty of matter, empty of emotion, of hope, of despair, of everything they needed to exist. Khorne was the first to attempt contact, because rage knows no caution. He poured his essence toward this new presence, offering the endless glory of battle, the ecstasy of blood and skulls, the warrior's path to apotheosis. The response was immediate and devastating. Nothing, not rejection. Rejection would have been anger, which Khorne could feed upon. This was the absence of response, like shouting into a void that doesn't even acknowledge sound exists. Darkseid didn't refuse Khorne's offer because he found it distasteful. He refused it because the concept of offering anything implied negotiation between equals, and Darkseid recognized no equals. The Blood God, who had broken greater demons for showing insufficient fury, felt something he hadn't experienced since his birth from humanity's first murder, inadequacy. His roar of frustration echoed through the warp, and or the first time in eternity, none of his demons answered, because they too felt it, the creeping cold realization that rage meant nothing to something that existed beyond emotion entirely. Tzeentch attempted subtlety, weaving visions of infinite possibility, showing Darkseid futures where he could reshape reality itself, become more than a tyrant, transcend into pure change. The architect of fate deployed his most intricate schemes, his cleverest manipulations, 9-dimensional gambits that had corrupted primarchs and shattered empires. But when those schemes touched Darkseid's mind, they encountered something worse than resistance. They encountered calculation. Every possibility Tzeentch offered was immediately analyzed, reduced to mathematical probability, and dismissed not because it was false, but because it was inefficient. Darkseid's mind wasn't chaotic, it was the opposite, a perfect machine of determination that saw Tzeentch's infinite possibilities as white noise obscuring the single inevitable outcome: total domination. The Changer of Ways watched his grandest design unravel into a simple linear equation, and for a being whose existence depended on complexity and mystery, this was worse than death. This was simplification. Nurgle approached with fatherly concern, offering acceptance, decay, the comfort of entropy's embrace. In his garden, he prepared a special plague, not to kill, but to welcome, to show Darkseid that all things eventually rot, that even tyranny must age and crumble, that there is beauty in accepting the cycle of death and rebirth. He sent his most beloved great unclean ones through the veil, massive demons oozing compassion and corruption in equal measure, their gardens of disease blooming with impossible life. They manifested on worlds Darkseid had conquered, ready to spread Nurgle's gifts. What happened next became a cautionary tale whispered among demons. The parademons didn't become infected. The plagues touched them and simply stopped. Not cured, stopped. As if the biological imperative to spread and mutate encountered programming that said no with such absolute authority that the disease forgot how to be a disease. The great unclean ones stood confused as their plague gardens withered, not from death but from purpose deprivation, and then Darkseid's Omega beams erased them so completely that even Nurgle couldn't remember their true names. Slaanesh was the most disturbed because she understood sensation better than her siblings understood their domains, and she felt nothing from Darkseid's conquered populations. No pleasure, no pain, no pride, no shame. Just grey compliance, existence without experience. She who thirsts tried to stir the survivors, to awaken desire in their deadened souls, to make them crave anything, power, revenge, even death, something to feed upon. But the anti-life equation had already rewritten them at a fundamental level. They existed, they obeyed, they felt nothing worth calling emotion. Slaanesh's realm began to dim, her palaces of excess growing silent as entire populations under Darkseid's control simply stopped generating the psyche. See resonance she fed upon. For a god born from the murder orgasm of the Eldari Empire, whose existence depended on sentient beings feeling anything intensely, this was starvation. She screamed through the warp, and the scream was tinged with genuine panic. He's not killing them, he's making them irrelevant. The four convened in the spaces between their realms, a meeting that hadn't occurred since the war in heaven, when they were still young, and the galaxy was still filled with old ones to torment. They didn't speak in words, but in concepts that would shatter mortal minds, debating what Darkseid represented. Horn argued for direct assault, marshalling every demon legion to crush this upstart. Tzeentch calculated that Darkseid might be an opportunity, a chess piece to use against the Imperium. Nurgle suggested patience, waiting for entropy to claim even this new god. Slaanesh proposed corruption through his followers, finding the one flaw that all tyrants possessed. But beneath their debate was a trembling truth none would speak aloud. Darkseid wasn't playing their game. He didn't want to corrupt the galaxy with chaos. He wanted to replace chaos with something worse, something that didn't even acknowledge their existence as relevant. They were gods of emotion, and he was the mathematics of absolute tyranny. They were narrative forces, and he was the ending that makes all narratives meaningless. Then Tzeentch saw it, a thread of future possibility so thin it almost didn't exist. A moment where Darkseid would attempt something unprecedented. He would try to claim the warp itself, to rewrite the fundamental psychic architecture of the galaxy into a weapon. If he succeeded, the four wouldn't be destroyed. They would be unmade, retroactively erased from reality, as if they had never been anything more than failed experiments in control. The architect of fate shared this vision with his siblings, and for the first time since their birth, the Chaos Gods experienced unity, not through ambition, but through survival instinct. They needed champions, they needed armies, they needed the Imperium. The irony was so bitter, even Tzeentch couldn't savor it. To survive, Chaos would have to help defend the corpse emperor they'd spent 10,000 years trying to destroy. Deep in the Eye of Terror, Abaddon the Despoiler received visions from all four powers simultaneously, an honor that should have elevated him to demonhood on the spot. Instead, the messages were simple, direct, and terrifying in their clarity. The great game is suspended. A new player has entered who doesn't know he's supposed to lose. If Darkseid claims terror, we all die, demon, mortal, and god alike. The anti-life equation is the opposite of chaos. It is perfect, absolute order, and order is the death of everything we are. Abaddon, who had unified 13 Black Crusades in the name of revenge, who had rejected godhood to remain human enough to feel hatred, looked at the gathered Chaos Lords around him and spoke words he never thought he'd say. We march for terror, not to destroy it, to defend it, because if the Golden Throne falls to Darkseid instead of us. He didn't finish, he didn't need to. Even Chaos champions understood. There are some victories that taste like extinction. Canoness Superior Margaret. Tar had purged heretics on 17 worlds without hesitation. She had burned witches, executed traitors, and walked through chaos corruption with nothing but prayer and a flamer keeping her soul intact. On the cardinal world of Ophelia VII, standing in the cathedral of the Emperor's eternal light, surrounded by 10,000 battle sisters singing hymns that had turned back demon incursions, she believed nothing could shake her faith. Then the sky above the cathedral turned grey, not clouded, but grey, as if reality itself had lost saturation, and through that colourless wound descended vessels that made the stained glass windows crack from sheer wrongness. The hymns faltered, not because the sisters stopped singing, but because the sound itself seemed to lose meaning mid-air, words dissolving into empty noise that no longer carried conviction. Margareta gripped her power sword tighter and ordered the chant to continue, but her voice sounded hollow even to herself. The parademons hit the cathedral like a plague of iron locusts, smashing through the sanctified walls with contempt for the sacred wards that should have burned Zeno's flesh on contact. Sister Superior Helena met them at the entrance with her seraphim squad, their jump packs roaring as they descended like angels of death, bolt pistols blazing hymns of destruction. They killed dozens, flamer fire purifying, bolt rounds exploding through corrupted flesh metal, but for every parademon that fell, 3 more poured through the breach, and worse, the ones they killed didn't stay dead. Their bodies twitched, reassembled, stood back up with wounds that should have been fatal, driven by something that wasn't warp sorcery or Zeno's regeneration. It was persistence, mathematical inevitability made manifest. They would rise again because their master's will calculated that they must, and reality was being forced to agree with bound. For the calculation, Canoness Margareta led her Celestian bodyguard deeper into the cathedral, toward the sanctum where the shrine of St. Celestine stood, the holiest relic on Ophelia VII, a place where miracles had manifested, where living saints had been born. If anywhere could resist this invasion, it would be here. They barricaded the sanctum doors with blessed ceramite, activated faith-powered energy shields that had held against greater demons, and knelt in prayer before the shrine. Margareta's voice rang out strong. "Emperor, grant us your light in this darkness. Let our faith be shield and sword against this Xenos abomination. We are your warriors, your unbroken daughters, and we will not yield." The response should have been warmth, the psychic touch of the Emperor's regard, the surge of divine power that made sororitas into living weapons. Instead, there was silence. Not the comforting silence of meditation, the empty silence of a prayer shouted into a void that has no ears to hear. The sanctum doors exploded inward, and through the smoke walked something that wore the shape of a man, but radiated wrongness like heat from a forge. It was a herald, one of Darkseid's chosen, its eyes burning with red fire, its voice a resonance that bypassed the ears and spoke directly to the soul. You pray to a corpse on a throne. You burn your lives like candles before a dead god who does not hear, does not care, does not even know you exist. This is your faith. This pathetic bargain, suffer now for rewards in an afterlife you'll never receive. The words were poison, but worse than poison. They were questions that Margareta had buried deep in her heart during her darkest moments, doubts she'd crushed beneath layers of discipline and devotion. Hearing them spoken aloud by this creature made them real in a way she couldn't simply pray away. Around her she saw sisters trembling, bolt pistols, lowering slightly, eyes losing focus. Sister Hospitaller, Dominica, the youngest of the Celestians, broke first. She dropped her weapons and fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "I've prayed every day for 20 years. I watched my sisters die screaming his name, and he never answered, never once. Why do we die for someone who doesn't even acknowledge our sacrifice?" Margareta wanted to shoot her for heresy. The old Margareta would have, without hesitation, but she couldn't move because the same question was echoing in her own mind now, amplified by whatever reality-warping signal Darkseid's herald was broadcasting. Every unanswered prayer, every sister who died without the Emperor's intervention, every miracle that seemed more like coincidence than divine will. The doubts arranged themselves into a logical proof, elegant and terrible. If he loved you, he would save you. He does not save you. Therefore, he does not love you. Therefore, faith is delusion. Therefore, Darkseid's offer of release is mercy. The herald extended a hand toward Sister Dominica, and she reached for it, her face twisted with relief and despair in equal measure. That was when Saint Celestine herself manifested, not the gentle vision from the stained glass, but the furious warrior saint burning with golden fire, her wings spreading wide enough to fill the sanctum, her voice a scream of defiance that shattered the herald's words mid-syllable. The Emperor does not measure love by convenience. Faith is not a transaction. It is the choice to stand when kneeling would be easier, to fight when surrender would be logical, to believe when every rational argument says you're a fool. If you want guaranteed victory, join the tyrants. If you want meaning, then stand with me. She drove her blade through the herald's chest, and where divine fire met anti-life programming, the explosion of conflicting realities sent shockwaves through the cathedral that knocked everyone to the ground. The herald dissolved, but its final words echoed. Saints are just slaves who learn to love their chains. Celestine turned to the surviving sisters, and there was no gentleness in her burning eyes, only fierce determination. I am a miracle because I refuse to stop being one, not because the Emperor grants me power like a gift. You think faith is a shield that protects you from doubt. No, faith is the choice to keep moving. Despite doubt, to fight despite fear, to love despite abandonment. Darkseid offers you certainty, release from choice, freedom from the burden of will. I offer you nothing but the chance to matter, to make your suffering mean something, to die knowing you chose your own damnation instead of accepting someone else's salvation. Who stands? Slowly, painfully, Margareta stood. Then Helena, then one by one the Celestians rose, picking up their weapons with shaking hands, eyes red from tears but burning with something fiercer than faith, spite. Pure, defiant, human spite against a universe that said their choices didn't matter. The battle that followed was brutal and short. The Sisters of Battle held the cathedral for 7 hours against endless parademon waves, not because they believed the Emperor would save them, but because Celestine's words had given them something Darkseid couldn't calculate. The irrational human need to prove that choosing suffering can matter more than accepting peace. When the cathedral finally fell, when the last sister fired her last bolt round and was torn apart by iron claws, the parademons found something unexpected in the ruins. Graffiti on the walls, written in the sisters' own blood. Not prayers, not hymns, just 7 words that would spread across 100 worlds. We chose this. Darkseid only offers slavery. It was small, it was meaningless in the grand calculation of galactic conquest, but it was the first recorded instance of resistance that Darkseid's forces couldn't immediately explain, humans choosing death over logical submission. And in the cold mathematics of his empire, anomalies were the first sign of flawed equations. Captain General Trajan Valoris had stood vigil over the Emperor's throne for centuries, and in all that time he had never felt what mortals called fear. The Adeptus Custodes were engineered beyond such weaknesses, each one a perfect fusion of genecraft and psycho-conditioning, immortal guardians who could slaughter greater demons with their bare hands and feel nothing but cold satisfaction. But as he stood atop the walls of the Imperial Palace, watching reality tear open above Terra's sky, watching vessels of impossible geometry descend through wounds in space-time that made even the webway look elegant by comparison, Valoris felt something close to fear's cousin, recognition. Recognition that what descended toward Holy Terror wasn't an invasion force, it was an audit. Darkseid hadn't come to conquer the Imperium. He'd come to prove that it had already failed, and the 10,000 were simply too perfectly conditioned to admit it yet. The first parademon wave hit the Eternity Gate like a tsunami of screaming metal, and the Custodes met them with the precision that had defended the palace for 10 millennia. Guardian spears flashed in perfect synchronization, each strike killing instantly, each movement economical and devastating. Shield Captain Tivar personally destroyed 47 invaders in the first 30 seconds, his Castellan axe moving too fast for mortal eyes to track, his Auramite armor repelling claws and energy weapons with contemptuous ease. For 5 minutes it seemed the palace defenses would hold as they always had. The Custodes were simply too perfect, too overwhelming, too correct in their violence for anything to breach their line. Then the second wave arrived, and Tyvar realized with cold horror that the parademons from the first wave weren't trying to win. They were learning. Every custodian combat pattern, every tactical formation, every weakness, in their perfect defense, recorded, analyzed, transmitted, and corrected. The third wave didn't fight like mindless Xenos anymore. They fought like Custodes, mirroring tactics that should have taken centuries to master, adapting to individual fighting styles in real time. When Aquilon Terminators deployed their firepike arrays to incinerate entire formations, the parademons scattered using custodian evasion protocols that shouldn't be physically possible for their wingspans. When Alaris custodians teleported behind enemy lines for decapitation strikes, they found parademons already waiting in ambush positions, as if Darkseid's forces could predict custodian doctrine better than the Custodes themselves. Valoris watched the battle data streams with growing unease. The enemy wasn't just adapting, they were demonstrating that everything the Custodes represented, perfection through design, superiority through engineering, immortality through service, was replicable, improvable, and ultimately obsolete compared to apocalyptian technology. Then the gates shuddered, and through the breach walked beings that made the parademons look like scouting drones, the elite. Darkseid's chosen enforcers, each one radiating power that registered on psychic scanners as equivalent to a demon prince, but without any warp signature. They moved with terrible grace, their armor seamless fusions of technology and flesh that made even Auramite look primitive. The lead elite, designation irrelevant, Custodes targeting systems couldn't even properly lock onto it, spoke in a voice like grinding gears. Golden slaves. You guard a corpse and call it duty. You kill in his name and call it honor. You have existed for 10,000 years without evolving, without questioning, without improving. This is what you call perfection. You are relics, beautiful, tragic relics. Darkseid offers you transcendence. Join us and become what you were always meant to be, useful. The words shouldn't have hurt. Custodes were immune to psychological warfare, but they hurt anyway because buried beneath conditioning and gene crafting, each custodian remembered the moment they'd been chosen, remembered the part of them that died to become this, and wondered, was it worth it? Shield Captain Tyvar charged the elite with his full squad, 10 custodians moving as one perfect killing formation, and died in 4 seconds. The elite didn't just counter their attacks, it predicted them, moving into positions that forced the custodians to overextend, turning their perfect coordination into a liability, then executing them with surgical precision that made their combat doctrine look slow by comparison. Tyvar's last thought, transmitted via battlecant to Valoris before his armor's systems failed, was simply, "They're better than us. Not stronger. Better. How?" The answer came through the elite's voice, broadcast across every Vox channel. "You were designed by a Krippy, led god who needed slaves perfect enough to never question him. We were designed by Darkseid, who needs tools efficient enough to function without supervision. Your perfection is decorative, ours is absolute." And the terrible thing, the thing that made Valoris's enhanced mind stutter, was that the statement was accurate. The Custodes began to die. Not in glorious last stands, not in heroic sacrifices that would be remembered in song. They died efficiently, mathematically, their perfect forms reduced to tactical problems that Darkseid's forces solved with cold precision. The Emperor's companions, the 300 greatest warriors in the Imperium, formed an unbreakable shield wall before the inner sanctum, and it held for 17 minutes before the elites simply calculated around it. Found the microscopic gaps in the formation that shouldn't exist in theory, but did exist in practice, exploited weaknesses in custodian doctrine that had gone unnoticed for millennia because nothing had ever survived long enough to find them. Valoris himself killed 3 elites in single combat, his guardian spear moving with speed that broke the sound barrier. But for every one he destroyed, 2 more adapted to his fighting style, and eventually he realized he wasn't fighting warriors, he was fighting a learning algorithm with bodies attached. In the moment before the sanctum doors failed, Valoris did something no Captain General had done in recorded history. He retreated. Not tactically withdrew, retreated, abandoning his post, pulling the surviving custodes back toward the throne room itself, because holding ground against an enemy that improved with every engagement was mathematically impossible. As he passed through the ancient corridors lined with statues of his predecessors, he heard their stone eyes judging him, and he wanted to scream at them. You never faced this. You fought enemies that could be killed, that stayed dead, that didn't turn your own perfection into predictable patterns to exploit. But the statues remained silent, and Valoris understood with bitter clarity the Custodes had been designed for a galaxy where being perfect was enough. Darkseid came from a multiverse where perfection was just the starting point and evolution beyond it was mandatory. They made their final stand in the throne room itself, the 10,000 reduced to fewer than 3,000, forming a living wall of auromite and fury between Darkseid's vanguard and the Golden Throne. Behind them, the Emperor sat in his eternal agony, his psychic presence so vast it should have incinerated any invader who dared approach. But the elites walked through his divine radiance like it was warm rain, their armor absorbing the psychic energy and converting it into power for their weapons. One of them looked directly at Valoris and spoke with something almost like pity. Your god doesn't even acknowledge you're dying for him. We've scanned his consciousness. He's entirely focused on holding the webway closed, on keeping the Astronomicon burning. You're not even important enough for him to notice. How does that feel, perfect slave? To realize you've wasted 10,000 years guarding someone who would function exactly the same if you all died right now? Valoris had no answer, because as he reached out with his hyper-enhanced senses toward the throne, trying to feel the Emperor's regard, his blessing, his acknowledgement of their sacrifice, he felt nothing at all, just the vast cold mathematics of a dying god, keeping a lighthouse lit, with no attention to spare for the golden warriors bleeding at his feet. The throne room's temperature dropped to absolute zero in an instant, not cold, the absence of heat, as if thermal energy itself forgot how to exist. Valoris and his remaining custodes felt their armor's environmental systems scream warnings, felt ice crystals forming on auromite that had withstood plasma immersion, felt their enhanced biology struggling against conditions that should only exist in the void between stars. Then the doors, massive slabs of blessed ceramite 3 meters thick, inscribed with wards that had held against Magnus the Red himself, simply ceased to be. Not destroyed, not disintegrated, not blown apart. They stopped existing, the atoms that composed them edited out of reality like words deleted from a manuscript. And through that impossible absence walked Darkseid, and the universe bent around him like light around a black hole. He was larger than the doorway, yet he fit through it. He moved slowly, yet he crossed the chamber instantly. He was physical matter, yet he existed in a way that made the materium look optional. The Emperor noticed. For the first time in 10 millennia, the master of mankind withdrew a fraction of his attention from the Astronomicon, and that single moment of distraction caused 17,000 navigators across the galaxy to scream simultaneously as the beacon flickered. But he judged the cost acceptable, because the thing standing before his throne was worth acknowledging. When the Emperor's awareness focused on Darkseid, reality itself trembled, two fundamental forces of will meeting in the same space, like matter and antimatter forced into proximity. The psychic pressure was so immense that the surviving custodes fell to their knees, bleeding from their eyes and ears, despite their enhanced physiology. The very atoms of the throne room vibrated at frequencies that caused the golden walls to hum like a struck bell. And through the building catastrophe, Darkseid smiled, not with pleasure but with recognition that he had finally found something in this primitive galaxy worth the effort of speaking to directly. Anathema. Darkseid's voice resonated not through air, but through the fundamental structure of reality itself, bypassing sound entirely to imprint directly onto consciousness. I have crossed the multiverse and found 10,000 versions of you. Some sat on thrones, some led armies, some had already died and been worshipped as myths. All of them shared one commonality, the arrogance to believe their will alone could reshape reality into their image of order. You are not unique. You are not even interesting. You are simply another failed god-king clinging to relevance while your empire crumbles into theological stupidity and technological stagnation. The only question that matters is this: will you kneel voluntarily, or must I demonstrate why resistance is mathematically futile? The words carried weight beyond meaning. They were statements of fact, carved into the structure of the universe itself, truth by declaration rather than proof. This was how Darkseid spoke, by making reality agree with him through sheer ontological authority. The Emperor's response came not in words but in force, a psychic assault that had shattered demon primarchs and burned entire warp fleets from existence, channeled through 10,000 years of agony and fury. The golden light that erupted from the throne was hot enough to transmute lead into plasma, bright enough to blind even custodian optics permanently, focused with such precision that it should have erased Darkseid down to the quantum level. The blast struck him full force, wrapping around his form like a supernova compressed into a single point, and dissipated against his skin like rain against stone. Darkseid hadn't moved, hadn't defended, hadn't even acknowledged the attack as worthy of response. He simply was, and existence itself seemed to conclude that trying to unmake him was a waste of energy. The Emperor's psychic might, power that sustained a galaxy-spanning beacon, that held a webway gate closed against infinite demons, had struck something that existed on such a fundamental level that attacking it was like trying to punch mathematics itself. Impressive, Darkseid conceded, his tone unchanged, educational rather than mocking. You command the warp, the realm of emotion and chaos, the dimension that gives form to thought and meaning to suffering. In another universe, you would be considered a god. Here, you are merely a lighthouse keeper, burning your own essence to guide ships through a storm you're too weak to calm. I have fought the source itself, anathema. I have stood against the presence that writes reality like narrative and survived its attempts to edit me from existence. Your psychic might is notable for this dimension. Against the absolute, it is barely a footnote. He took one step forward, and that single step caused the golden throne to crack. Not physically, but conceptually, the idea of its inviolability damaged by Darkseid's proximity. The 10,000 screamed in defiance and charged as one, their guardian spears blazing with power drawn from the Emperor's own essence. 3,000 perfect warriors executing a killing strike that had been practiced for millennia. Darkseid's eyes flared red, and Omega beams lanced across the throne room in geometric perfection. The beams didn't simply kill, they concluded. Each custodian struck by the crimson energy ceased mid-stride, their atoms dispersing into component particles, their souls not destroyed but erased retroactively, as if they had never been synthesized from the Emperor's genetic template in the first place. Valorous watched in horror as warriors he'd trained for centuries simply stopped being, not even leaving corpses behind, just empty spaces where golden guardians had stood one moment before. And the Omega beams adjusted trajectory mid-flight, curving around obstacles, tracking targets that tried to evade, patient and inevitable as mathematics. Within seconds, Valorous stood alone, the last custodian standing between Darkseid and the Emperor. And he knew with absolute certainty that he was about to die in a way that would make his service meaningless, his sacrifice forgotten, his very existence questioned. The Emperor rose from the golden throne, and the sound it made was like a planet breaking. He hadn't stood in 10,000 years. His body was more corpse than flesh, held together by the throne's life support and sheer psychic will. But he stood now, because Darkseid was worth the cost. The Astronomicon guttered like a candle in a hurricane, and across the galaxy, billions of voices screamed as the beacon dimmed. Ships were lost in the warp. Demons poured through weakening Geller fields. Entire sectors went dark as the Emperor diverted his full attention to the throne room, to this single confrontation, gambling the entire Imperium on one moment of cosmic defiance. When he spoke, his voice was layered with millions of dead psychers, powered by the souls fed to him daily, resonating with the weight of 10 millennia of sacrifice. You are not welcome here. And behind those words was something Darkseid hadn't encountered in this galaxy yet. Genuine threat, not empty defiance, not desperate hope, actual calculated capacity to harm him. The two forces collided, and the throne room became the epicenter of a psychic earthquake that registered across half the galaxy. The Emperor's power, accumulated suffering transmuted into will, met Darkseid's anti-life equation, mathematical proof that hope was irrational and submission was inevitable. Where they clashed, reality itself couldn't decide which paradigm to follow, creating cascading paradoxes that caused the walls to age 10,000 years in seconds, then reverse to newborn stone, then flicker between states so rapidly they became quantum probability clouds. Valoris, still somehow alive in the maelstrom, witnessed something no custodian should ever see. His emperor, the master of mankind, the god who is not a god, struggling, not losing, not yet, but fighting with visible effort against an enemy who treated the confrontation as an interesting puzzle rather than an existential threat. And in that moment, Captain General Trajan Valoris understood the terrible truth that Darkseid had known from the beginning. The Emperor could fight, could rage, could burn with all the fury of a dying star. But he could not win, not because he lacked power, but because he was fighting while chained to a throne, while maintaining the Astronomicon, while holding back the Chaos Gods, while doing 10,000 tasks simultaneously. Darkseid had only one job: conquer. And he was very, very good at his job. Supreme Grand Master Kaldor Drygo had banished greater demons with words alone. He had carved Mortarian's heart and survived the warp for subjective centuries without falling to corruption. When the call reached Titan, emergency protocols, terror besieged, entity of extreme power breaching the palace, he assumed it was another chaos incursion, another demon that needed to be sent screaming back to the Immaterium. He led his entire brotherhood through emergency teleportation, ARER, arriving in the throne room with 50 Grey Knights already chanting the rites of banishment, their nemesis force weapons blazing with psychic fire designed to unmake demonic essence. They materialized directly between the Emperor and Darkseid, their Aegis armor flaring with protective wards that had resisted even bloodthirster claws, their minds reinforced with psycho-conditioning that made chaos corruption impossible. Drygo took one look at Darkseid, registered the massive grey form, the burning red eyes, the aura of absolute wrongness, and began the ritual that had ended greater demon manifestations instantly. By the Emperor's will, I name thee false, I name thee illusion, I command thee begone. Nothing happened. The words of banishment, phrases that carried the weight of the Emperor's own authority, syllables that could force demons back through the veil just by being spoken, echoed in the throne room and dissipated like smoke. Darkseid didn't even turn to acknowledge them. He continued his confrontation with the Emperor, as if 50 of the Imperium's greatest demon hunters were simply not worth noticing, the way a scholar might ignore insects buzzing near his desk. Drygo felt confusion first, then concern, then something approaching panic as he cycled through 7 different banishment protocols: High Gothic, Low Gothic, ancient Terran dialects that predated the Imperium itself, and received the same result each time: absolutely nothing. His psychic senses, attuned to detect even the faintest warp taint, registered Darkseid clearly. The entity was there, was real, was affecting reality, but contained 0 warp signature. Not suppressed, not hidden, simply absent, as if he existed in a framework where the Immaterium was irrelevant. Brother Captain Stern, veteran of 3 Black Crusades and the Pandorax campaign, stepped forward with his nemesis demon hammer raised. The weapon was a relic that had shattered demon princes and sent greater demons howling into non-existence. It didn't just kill demons, it annihilated their essential nature, making it impossible for them to ever reform. Stern channeled every ounce of his considerable psychic might into the hammer, the weapon erupting with silver fire that burned so bright even Grey Knights had to shield their eyes. He charged with the full weight of the Emperor's sanction behind him and brought the hammer down on Darkseid's back with enough force to crack a Land Raider in half. The hammer connected, and the sound was wrong, not the satisfying crunch of demon flesh unmade, but the hollow thunk of metal striking inert stone. The psychic flames that should have seared warp entities scattered against Darkseid's skin like water against glass, finding no purchase, no weakness, nothing to burn. And Darkseid, still locked in his confrontation with the Emperor, casually backhanded Stern without even looking. The blow sent Stern flying across the throne room with enough velocity to embed him 3 meters deep into solid adamantium wall, his Aegis armor crumpled like paper, his enhanced biology barely keeping him alive despite injuries that would have killed a normal Astartes instantly. Drygo watched in horror as his strike force, 50 Grey Knights, each one worth a company of Space Marines, each one psychically empowered and ritually sanctified, attacked with coordinated precision and achieved exactly nothing. Their nemesis weapons cut Darkseid's flesh, barely, creating shallow wounds that sealed themselves immediately, but inflicted no spiritual damage, no warp burn, no unmaking. It was like fighting a statue made of contempt. Every banishment ritual, every holy oath, every psychic assault they'd perfected over millennia of demon hunting was designed to exploit the fundamental weakness of chaos entities, their dependence on the warp for existence. Darkseid wasn't from the warp. Darkseid didn't need the warp. Darkseid existed in spite of it, and that made him immune to every weapon in the Grey Knight's arsenal. You fight like men who have only ever known one type of enemy. Darkseid finally spoke, his attention still primarily on the Emperor but now acknowledging the Grey Knights with a fragment of his awareness. Creatures of emotion and chaos, beings that can be banished with willpower and ritual because they are ultimately thought forms given flesh. I am not thought, I am fact. You cannot banish mathematics, you cannot exile gravity, you cannot pray away inevitability. Your entire brotherhood was designed to fight parasites that infest reality from outside. I am reality, compressed into the shape of absolute will. Your specialization makes you powerful, it also makes you useless. As if to demonstrate, one of his elites stepped through a portal that opened behind the Grey Knights. Parademons had been dying to their nemesis weapons, but elites were different, evolved beyond biological weakness. The elite moved through the Grey Knights formation like a thresher through wheat, its combat algorithms analyzing and countering psychic techniques in real time, killing without effort or ceremony. Brother Castiel, a Justicar who had personally sent the demon lord Makachin screaming back to the warp, found himself paralyzed as the elite injected something directly into his neck. Not poison, not corruption, but information. The anti-life equation, transmitted as pure data through his enhanced nervous system. Castiel had resisted demonic possession, had endured torture from Keeper of Secrets, had walked through warp storms without flinching. But this was different. This wasn't temptation or corruption. It was proof. Mathematical proof that every battle he'd fought was meaningless, that the Emperor he served didn't love him, that duty was just another word for slavery, that his sacrifices had accomplished nothing except prolonging a doomed empire's death. The proof was elegant, undeniable, structured with such logical perfection that trying to reject it felt like trying to disbelieve gravity. Castiel's last words before his mind shattered completely were whispered through Vox. "Brothers, he's right. We've been fighting for nothing. All of it was for nothing." Drygo grabbed Castiel's collapsing form and tried to reach him psychically, tried to reinforce his mental defenses with the Brotherhood's combined willpower. But what he found inside Castiel's mind was worse than chaos corruption. Chaos could be fought, burned out, excised through discipline and faith. This was acceptance. Castiel hadn't been corrupted into believing the anti-life equation. He had been convinced, given arguments he couldn't refute, evidence he couldn't deny, logic he couldn't escape. And the most terrifying part was that Drygo, touching the edges of that proof through their psychic link, couldn't find a flaw in it either. The only reason he could resist was through willful rejection of reason itself, through choosing faith over logic, through deciding that even if everything Dark said was true, he would fight anyway. But that wasn't a victory. That was just stubbornness, spite pretending to be conviction. The Emperor's voice thundered through the throne room, and for a brief moment, his psychic might surged enough to push Darkseid back. Not far, just a single step, but enough to create breathing room. His words were directed at the Grey Knights, at Drygo specifically. "Demon Hunter, you cannot banish what was never demon. You cannot pray away what does not derive power from belief, but you can fight, not with ritual, not with dogma, with the simple, irrational, magnificent human refusal to accept what logic tells you is inevitable. If you cannot banish him, then delay him. Every second he spends killing you is a second he is not rewriting my Imperium. Make him earn his conquest. Make him pay for every inch of holy terror in Grey Knight blood. You were built to be perfect demon killers. Today, you will be what you were before the specialization, simply warriors. Is that acceptable? Drygo, surrounded by dying brothers, facing an enemy that made their entire purpose obsolete, laughed. It was a broken sound, half despair and half fury, but it was genuine. My Lord Emperor, acceptable is for politicians and bureaucrats. We are Grey Knights. We make the unacceptable tremble. He raised his sword one more time, knowing it wouldn't work, knowing he would die, knowing that nothing he did would matter in the grand equation of this invasion. And he charged anyway, because that's what irrational, stubborn, magnificent humans do when mathematics tells them they've already lost. They fight harder. Abaddon the Despoiler stood at the command throne of the vengeful spirit, staring at terror through the viewport with feelings so complicated he couldn't name them all. Hate. Always hate, the foundational emotion that sustained him through 10,000 years of war. But also something else, something that tasted like ash in his mouth. Necessity. Behind him stood representatives of all four Chaos Gods, a bloodthirster bound by Horn's direct command, a Lord of Change emanating Tzeentch's reluctant cooperation, a great unclean one weeping Nurgle's sorrowful acceptance, and a keeper of secrets radiating Slaanesh's desperate fear. They were not allies. They were barely even functional as a unified force. But the Chaos Gods had issued a command so unprecedented that even Abaddon, who had rejected demonhood specifically to maintain his independence, could not refuse. Save terror, not conquer it, save it. The irony was so bitter, it could choke demons. Lord Despoiler voxed Urkrathos, his most trusted sorcerer, voice strained with cognitive dissonance. The warp routes are clear. We could strike the palace while it's weakened, while the Emperor diverts his attention to the invader. This is the opportunity we've waited millennia for. The Golden Throne exposed, the Custodes decimated, Terra's defenses in chaos. Why are we not attacking? Abaddon turned slowly, his talon of Horus crackling with barely contained power, and when he spoke, his voice was granite grinding against steel. Because, sorcerer, if we conquer Terra today, we inherit that. He gestured toward the tactical display showing Darkseid's forces systematically converting entire hive cities. Apocalypse vessels in orbit, broadcasting the anti-life equation across every frequency, populations of billions standing motionless in grey obedience. Chaos needs the Imperium alive, needs humans to feel hope so we can crush it, to have faith so we can corrupt it, to experience pleasure and pain and rage and decay. That thing doesn't conquer. It erases. It turns the galaxy into a machine running on mathematical certainty. Do you understand? If Darkseid wins, there will be no more chaos, no more warp, just cold, perfect slavery where no one even remembers they used to be free. The fleet translated into real space above Terra, and immediately Imperial defense batteries locked onto them, orbital defense platforms that should have opened fire instantly. But the weapons didn't activate. Instead, a Vox transmission cut through from Terra's surface, and the voice that spoke was one Abaddon hadn't heard in 10 millennia outside of battlefield taunts. Marneus Calgar, chapter master of the Ultramarines, his tone containing more poison than a Nurgle plague garden. Abaddon, the fact that I am speaking to you instead of ordering your fleet destroyed should tell you how catastrophic the situation has become. High Lords and Inquisition have authorized temporary cessation of hostilities. Condition: your forces assist in repelling the Xenos invasion currently threatening Terra. After the threat is neutralized, standard protocols resume and we go back to trying to kill each other. Do you accept these terms, or do I have the pleasure of dying while watching Lance batteries vaporize your flagship? Abaddon wanted to refuse out of pure spite, wanted to laugh and watch Terra burn. But he looked at the demon representatives behind him. beings who literally could not exist without the emotional turbulence of mortals, and saw genuine terror in their eyes. "We accept," Abaddon said, each word tasting like spiritual acid. "But Kalga, when this is over, when Darkseid is gone and the galaxy returns to normal, I'm coming for Macraggy first. I want you to remember that the despoiler who saved Terra is the same one who will burn your precious Ultramar to ash." The Vox crackled with what might have been grim laughter. "Wouldn't expect anything less, traitor. Transmitting deployment coordinates. And Abaddon, try not to accidentally shoot any loyalists during the battle. The Inquisition is watching, and they're very creative with sanctions." The transmission cut, and Abaddon began issuing orders that made his own Chaos Lords stare in disbelief. Black Legion forces were to coordinate with Imperial Guard regiments. World Eaters would fight alongside Space Wolves. Thousand Suns sorcerers would share tactical intelligence with Grey Knights. The galaxy had gone so thoroughly insane that Chaos Marines and Loyalists were fighting side by side, and the truly mad part was that it made strategic sense. The combined forces hit Darkseid's siege lines like a hammer made of concentrated irony. Black Legion Terminators teleported into positions alongside Blood Angels, their bolters roaring in unison against Parademon hordes. World Eaters. Berserkers charged with Imperial fists, their hatred of each other temporarily sublimated into hatred of the invaders who dared treat both Chaos and Imperium as equally irrelevant. Abaddon himself fought shoulder to shoulder with a custodian, an actual custodian, golden armor and all, and the absurdity of it would have been hilarious if they weren't both about to die. The custodian killed with cold precision, Abaddon killed with howling fury. Together they carved through elites that had been systematically dismantling Imperial defenses, and for 30 glorious seconds they were brutally, horrifyingly effective. Then an elite analyzed their combined tactics, adapted, and they both nearly died before a Chaos Sorcerer intervened with warp lightning that the elite couldn't immediately counter. The demons that accompanied Abaddon's forces discovered something that made their immaterial essence writhe. They were being deleted, not banished, deleted. When an elite killed a demon, it didn't send the creature screaming back to the warp to eventually reform. It erased the demon's essential pattern, making it impossible for the Chaos Gods to reconstruct them. Permanent death for beings that were supposed to be immortal ideas given form. The bloodthirster bound to Abaddon's flagship lasted 7 minutes in combat before an elite caught it with a weapon that looked like solidified entropy and simply ended it. The greater demon's final scream wasn't rage or pain, it was confusion, the existential horror of something immortal realizing it was about to experience true death. Khorne felt the loss immediately, felt one of his favorite champions simply cease to exist in a way that violated the fundamental rules of demonhood, and the blood god's roar of fury echoed through the warp so loudly that psychers across 3 sectors suffered simultaneous hemorrhages. Abaddon found himself fighting back-to-back with Chapter Master Kalgar in the ruins of what used to be the Astronomican's secondary relay station, both of them bleeding, both of them down to combat knives because their primary weapons had been destroyed. The situation was so grimly absurd that Abaddon started laughing, a broken, half-mad sound that made Kalgar glance at him with something between concern and contempt. "Something funny, traitor," Kalgar growled, parrying a parademon's claws with his power fist. Abaddon grinned through the blood coating his face, just appreciating the poetry, loyalist. 10,000 years of war between us, and it takes a multiversal tyrant to make us cooperate. Makes you wonder if maybe the galaxy was better when we were united, doesn't it? Kalgar's response was ice. No, it doesn't. The moment Darkseid falls, you're my enemy again. This changes nothing except temporarily who I'm shooting. But there was something in his tone, the barest hint of exhaustion, of old grief, that suggested maybe, buried deep beneath millennia of hatred, some part of him remembered when Chaos Marines were just Marines before the heresy broke everything forever. The combined assault managed something the Imperium alone had failed to do. They pushed Darkseid's forces back from the outer palace walls, creating a buffer zone that gave the defenders time to regroup. But the cost was catastrophic. Half of Abaddon's Black Legion was gone, not retreated, not wounded, gone, erased as thoroughly as if they'd never been recruited. Entire Chaos Warband had been deleted alongside Imperial regiments. The demons were refusing to manifest anymore because facing elites meant risking permanent death, something they literally couldn't psychologically process. And Darkseid himself hadn't even acknowledged the counterattack. He remained in the throne room, locked in his confrontation with the Emperor, as if the combined might of Chaos and Imperium fighting his vanguard outside was simply weather, notable but not concerning. Abaddon stared at the palace through the smoke and wondered, if the galaxy's two greatest military forces combined couldn't even make Darkseid blink, what did that say about their chances? What did it say about whether any of this, the Imperium, Chaos, the Long War itself, had ever mattered at all? Mankind was powerful, certainly, but he was fighting while chained to maintenance of an entire collapsing empire, like a warrior trying to duel while simultaneously juggling 1,000 fragile objects. Darkseid faced no such limitations. His entire existence was optimized for a single function: dominance. So he made a decision that would change the fundamental nature of this galaxy forever. He stopped fighting the Emperor and turned his attention to the source of the Emperor's power, the warp itself. If he could claim the Immaterium, rewrite its chaotic nature into something orderly and useful, he wouldn't need to conquer the Imperium world by world. He would simply turn their own gods against them, transform the realm of infinite possibility into the ultimate expression of anti-life. The moment Darkseid's will touched the warp, every psyker in the galaxy screamed. Astropaths clawed their own eyes out. Navigators suffered seizures so violent their bones shattered. Librarians felt something impossible happening, the sea of souls, the infinite ocean of emotion and thought, beginning to freeze, not metaphorically, literally solidifying, chaos organizing into rigid mathematical structures, the fundamental randomness that made the warp being overwritten by absolute deterministic law. In the realm of chaos, the four felt their domains beginning to collapse. Khorne's brass citadel started calculating the optimal efficiency of each murder, reducing rage to simple equations of violence per second. Tzeentch's infinite schemes simplified into linear progressions with predictable outcomes. Nurgle's garden stopped cycling, entropy becoming a fixed constant rather than an inevitable progression. Slaanesh palace of excess dimmed as sensation itself was reduced to measurable neurological inputs. The Chaos Gods were being debugged, treated like errors in a program that needed correction. The Emperor felt it too, felt his connection to the warp, the psychic might that made him the most powerful human psyker in existence, beginning to conform to external rules. His thoughts, normally fluid and multi-threaded, started locking into binary decision trees. Yes or no, obey or resist, submit or die. The infinite complexity of human consciousness that he represented was being compressed into something simpler, cleaner, more efficient. And Darkseid's voice resonated through both Materium and Immaterium simultaneously. The warp is chaos. Chaos is inefficiency. Inefficiency is the enemy of purpose. I am purpose incarnate, therefore the warp belongs to me. This is not conquest, this is correction. I am fixing a fundamental flaw in your universe's architecture, and you should be grateful. Order is peace, submission is freedom, anti-life is the answer to every question you've been afraid to ask. Around him, reality began to reshape itself to match his declaration, existence itself bending toward his ontological authority. In the depths of the warp, the four convened in the space between their realms for the second time in as many days, except this time, their meeting place was solidifying into geometric perfection, angles that shouldn't exist in the formless chaos now appearing and stabilizing. Khorne manifested in his least corrupted form, the primordial war spirit that predated his current demonic nature, and spoke with uncharacteristic clarity. He's not invading the warp, he's recompiling it, turning our realm into an extension of his anti-life architecture. If he succeeds, we don't die. We become tools, subroutines in his empire management system. I'd rather cease to exist. Tzeentch, for once not scheming but genuinely calculating survival odds, added, "The probabilities are collapsing. Every future I can see ends the same way. Darkseid wins. The only variable is how much of reality he rewrites before achieving complete dominance. There is one option, impossible, repugnant but mathematically sound. We empower the anathema, give him our strength directly, temporarily, make the Emperor powerful enough to stop Darkseid's claim on the warp. Nurgle wheezed laughter that sounded like plague victims drowning. Give our ancient enemy the power to destroy us. Why not just surrender to Darkseid now and save ourselves the humiliation? But Slaanesh, who understood desire better than her siblings understood their domains, saw the twisted elegance of it. Because if Darkseid claims the warp, we're enslaved forever. If we empower the anathema, we're gambling on mutual destruction, us and him, cancelling each other out. Either way, we probably die, but one option leaves us as slaves and the other leaves us as martyrs. I choose annihilation over submission, always. The four reached a consensus that would have been impossible under any other circumstance. They would channel their combined essence through the warp, through 10,000 years of accumulated belief and sacrifice, directly into the Emperor. They would make their greatest enemy into a temporary god powerful enough to challenge Darkseid. And then, if he somehow survived, they'd go back to trying to corrupt him. But first, survival. The Emperor felt the change like lightning striking his skeletal form. Power flooded through the golden throne, not his own accumulated psychic might, but the raw essence of the Chaos Gods themselves, filtered through 1,000,000 billion souls who had ever felt rage, hope, despair, or desire. Khorne's endless fury, Tzeentch's infinite schemes, Nurgle's acceptance of entropy, Slaanesh's transcendent sensation, all of it combined, weaponized, directed through the Emperor's will like sunlight through a lens. For the first time in 10,000 years, the master of mankind stood fully, not sustained by the throne, but empowered beyond it, his psychic presence expanding until it filled the entire solar system, until every human from Terra to the Oort cloud felt his regard simultaneously. His voice, when it emerged, shook planets. Darkseid. You wanted to see what a god looks like when fighting without restraint, when not divided against himself, not chained to maintenance duties, not crippled by 10 millennia of slow death. This is that god, and I am going to show you why this galaxy has survived horrors you cannot imagine, because we are stubborn enough to unite even our worst enemies when existence itself is at stake. The clash that followed was visible from orbit as a sphere of impossible light expanding from the Imperial Palace, reality itself struggling to contain two fundamental forces colliding at full strength. The Emperor struck with power amplified by chaos, psychic fire that burned with Khorne's rage, struck from angles calculated by Tzeentch, persistent as Nurgle's plagues, sharp as Slaanesh's excess. For the first time since arriving in this galaxy, Darkseid was pushed back, his form actually staggering under the assault, his omega beams meeting psychic lances and cancelling out rather than simply erasing them. The Lord of Apocalypse looked at the Emperor with something new in his burning eyes, not fear, but interest. There, he said, his voice actually pleased. There is the worthwhile opponent I was promised, not the crippled corpse playing lighthouse keeper, but the God King at full strength. Finally, this invasion becomes interesting. He raised his hands, and the anti-life equation manifested as visible architecture around him, mathematical proof made into armor, logic given form as weapons. The throne room became the center of a battle between two fundamental concepts. Will versus inevitability. The Emperor poured everything into breaking Darkseid's claim on the warp, his own power, the Chaos God's reluctant aid, the psychic resonance of every prayer ever spoken in his name, the accumulated faith of 10,000 years of worship he'd never wanted but could now weaponize. The warp began to crack under the strain, fissures appearing in reality where neither chaos nor order could exist, null zones of pure existential void. Darkseid adapted, his anti-life equation recalculating, finding new vectors of attack, exploiting the Emperor's dependence on the very warp he was trying to protect. They were equally matched now, not in raw power, but in determination. Neither could destroy the other, neither would yield. The battle could continue for centuries, for millennia. Two gods locked in eternal stalemate while the galaxy burned around them. Unless someone made a sacrifice. The Emperor saw it first. Saw the only way to stop Darkseid from claiming the warp was to make the warp itself inaccessible, to seal it away so completely that even a multiversal tyrant couldn't reach it. But doing so would mean cutting off all psychic power in the galaxy, ending the Astronomicon, dooming humanity to slow extinction as navigator houses failed and the Imperium fragmented into isolated pockets. It would mean his own death. Not the slow death he'd been enduring, but complete annihilation as his psychic existence was erased along with access to the warp. It would mean condemning the galaxy to darkness, but it would also mean Darkseid couldn't win, couldn't rewrite the warp into his tool, couldn't turn the galaxy into an extension of Apocalypse. The Emperor looked at Darkseid, and for just a moment, the two beings understood each other perfectly. Both were willing to burn everything to prevent the other's victory. Both knew that some battles could only end in mutual annihilation. Both accept, edit. The Emperor began gathering power for the final gambit, the ultimate sacrifice that would save the galaxy by destroying the very thing that made it worth saving. And Darkseid, seeing what was coming, smiled, because even in defeat he would prove his point, that hope, faith and love all end the same way, in fire, in darkness, in the cold mathematics of inevitable loss. Nobody knows exactly what happened in the final moments of the throne room confrontation, because everyone who witnessed it directly either died or went irreversibly insane. The official inquisitorial records, sealed under Vermilion-level clearance, accessible only to the High Lords and never to be opened except at the end of all things, contain 17 contradictory accounts from 17 different sources, each one equally impossible and equally verified by multiple witnesses. What follows are the three most coherent versions, and the truth is probably worse than all of them combined. This is what the survivors remember, filtered through trauma and psychic damage, and the fundamental human inability to comprehend what happens when gods wage war at full strength. This is the story of the day Terra survived, and the galaxy learned that survival sometimes costs more than defeat. Ending 1. The Sealed Warp. In this version, the Emperor succeeded in his final gambit. He severed the connection between the Materium and Immaterium completely, sealing the warp behind barriers so absolute that not even Darkseid's ontological authority could breach them. The psychic shockwave killed every navigator simultaneously, blinded every astropath, and silenced the Astronomicon forever. Darkseid, denied access to the power source he intended to corrupt, was forced to retreat, not defeated, but strategically withdrawing because a galaxy without warp travel wasn't worth conquering. He left through the same dimensional rifts he arrived from, and Terra was saved. But the cost was everything. Without warp travel, the Imperium fragmented within a decade. Worlds isolated from each other reverted to pre-space age technology. Trillions died in the chaos. The Emperor himself vanished. Some say he died with the warp. Others claim he still exists somewhere in the sealed dimension, eternally preventing Darkseid's return. Abaddon and his chaos forces, cut off from their gods, either died screaming or fled into the webway's ruins. The galaxy survived, but it was reduced to isolated pockets of humanity, slowly forgetting they were ever united. Darkseid didn't conquer the Imperium, he just proved that saving it required destroying everything it stood for. Ending 2. The Pyrrhic Bargain. In this version, the Chaos Gods maintained their empowerment of the Emperor, and together they matched Darkseid's might perfectly, resulting in a stalemate that threatened to tear reality apart. Tzeentch, ever the schemer, proposed a bargain. Darkseid would leave this galaxy permanently, and in exchange the Chaos Gods would give him knowledge of a different universe, one without warp entities to complicate his conquest. Darkseid, who valued efficiency over pride, accepted. He withdrew his forces. He sealed the dimensional rifts behind him and left the Milky Way to its fate. But the cost of the bargain was terrible. The Chaos Gods had to sacrifice entire demon legions, permanently erasing them from existence to fuel the knowledge transfer. Horn lost his greatest bloodthirsters. Tzeentch's most intricate schemes collapsed. Nurgle's eldest plagues were sterilized. Slanesh's most perfect servants simply ceased. The warp grew quieter, weaker, less dangerous, but also less alive. The Emperor survived, but remained chained to the throne, now even more isolated because the gods who'd briefly allied with him were diminished beyond recovery. The Imperium continued, but both chaos and order were permanently weakened. Nobody won. Both sides just agreed to stop losing so catastrophically. Ending 3. The Eternal Stalemate. In this version, neither side could claim victory or accept defeat, so the battle simply continues. The Emperor and Darkseid remain locked in psychic combat within a sealed pocket dimension that exists between the throne room and the warp, neither able to destroy the other, neither willing to yield. Time flows differently there. Seconds outside are subjective centuries inside. The Emperor can no longer maintain the Astronomicon directly, so the Adeptus Astronomica was forced to create a lesser beacon powered by increased Psyche sacrifice. The Imperium survives in diminished form. Terra remains scarred, half the palace in ruins, reality itself fractured in ways that make entire districts inaccessible to normal physics. Darkseid's forces withdrew but didn't leave. They occupy 3 sectors on the edge of Imperial space, establishing a permanent beachhead, waiting for their master's inevitable victory. Both the Imperium and Apocalypse are locked in Cold War, neither able to finish the other, both slowly bleeding resources into an eternal conflict. Some say you can still hear the battle if you stand in certain parts of the ruined palace. Psychic echoes of 2 wills so absolute they bent reality into a loop from which neither can escape. Custodes stand guard over the sealed chamber, knowing their Emperor fights still, unable to help, unable to even confirm he's winning. Whichever ending you believe, the aftermath was undeniable. Captain General Valoris survived. Barely, his body broken, his mind scarred by truths that made even custodian conditioning scream. He stood in the ruins of the throne room and issued orders that rewrote Imperial doctrine. Grey Knights were retrained to fight enemies without warp signatures. The Mechanicus began reverse engineering, captured apocalyptian technology, despite the tech heresy it represented. The Inquisition created new orders specifically to monitor for dimensional incursions that bypassed the warp entirely. And in the deepest vaults of the Imperial Palace, they sealed 17 parademons in stasis, still twitching, still broadcasting their corrupting signal, even in suspended animation, studied by the Imperium's greatest minds, who were desperately trying to understand an enemy that didn't follow any rules they recognized. The galaxy had changed. The assumptions that sustained 10,000 years of doctrine, that the warp was the only supernatural threat, that faith and psychers could solve any problem, that the Imperium faced no peer rivals, all of them shattered. Abaddon the Despoiler withdrew his forces to the Eye of Terror, and did something unprecedented. He thanked the Imperium for the temporary alliance, then promised he'd return to finish what Horus started once he'd figured out how to prevent Darkseid from interfering again. The Chaos Gods retreated to their realms to recover, weaker but wiser, now aware that the Great Game was just a local conflict in a much larger multiverse. Across the Imperium, new prayers emerged, not just to the Emperor, but about him. Stories of the day he stood fully and fought a god from beyond the stars. Saints spoke of visions showing the Emperor in eternal combat, holding back something worse than chaos, bleeding forever so humanity could continue existing. The ecclesiarchy didn't know whether to canonize these visions or declare them heresy, so they did both, creating theological schisms that would last millennia. In the ruins of Ophelia VII, a single sister of battle survivor carved words into the cathedral's foundation before dying from her wounds. We chose suffering over peace. We chose faith over logic. We chose to matter over being efficient. Darkseid offered us freedom from choice. We told him to go to hell. Those words were found by Inquisitor Covenant 3 months later and became the unofficial motto of a new militant order dedicated to fighting threats that existed outside traditional imperial understanding. They called themselves the Order of Defiant Variables, and their creed was simple. When mathematics says you've lost, fight harder. When logic proves resistance is futile, resist anyway. When gods tell you to kneel, spit in their face and die standing. It wasn't doctrine, it wasn't tactical, it was the irrational human stubbornness that Darkseid had calculated around but never truly understood. The willingness to lose everything rather than accept someone else's definition of victory. Years later, a lone transmission reached Imperial listening posts from the direction Darkseid's fleet had departed. Just 3 words repeating on all frequencies in perfect Gothic that suggested he'd learned the language specifically to deliver this message. Darkseid will return. It might have been a threat, it might have been a promise, or it might have been something worse, a statement of mathematical inevitability, a prophecy disguised as declaration. The Imperium prepared for his return. The Mechanicus built new weapons, the Grey Knights trained for enemies without warp signatures, the Custodes rebuilt their ranks and studied combat recordings looking for patterns to exploit. But deep down, every Imperial commander who'd witnessed the invasion knew the truth. They hadn't won. At best, they'd delayed. At worst, they'd simply made Darkseid interested, given him a puzzle worth solving, ensured he'd return with better strategies and improved forces. They'd survived by making him work for it. And for a tyrant who had conquered pantheons across infinite realities, challenge wasn't a deterrent, it was an invitation. You decide what happened. Did the Emperor seal the warp and doom humanity to slow fragmentation? Did the Chaos Gods bargain Darkseid away at terrible cost? Is the Emperor still fighting in some pocket dimension, locked in eternal stalemate? The Inquisition has 17 versions, and they're all equally classified, equally confirmed, equally impossible. Maybe the truth is that all 3 happened simultaneously, reality itself fracturing into multiple outcomes because the forces involved were too powerful for causality to handle cleanly. Or maybe, and this is the darkest possibility, Darkseid let the Imperium survive because a conquered galaxy is less useful than a desperate one, and he wants them alive and afraid, preparing for his return, building NCs he can study, creating new weapons he can adapt to. Because that's what Darkseid does. He turns your victories into data, your defenses into lessons, your hope into the fuel for his inevitable triumph. The Imperium survived the day Darkseid invaded Warhammer 40k. But survival isn't victory. Sometimes it's just a longer, slower way to lose. And in the cold mathematics of anti-life, even choosing to fight is just another variable in an equation that always ends the same way. Darkseid is. Now tell me in the comments, which ending do you believe actually happened? Could the Emperor defeat Darkseid if he wasn't chained to the throne? Is Darkseid above the Chaos Gods, or would the warp eventually corrupt even him? And most importantly, what universe should Darkseid invade next? Drop your theories below, and if you want more impossible crossover battles where gods bleed and galaxies burn, subscribe. Because in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. And now, there are enemies even the Imperium can't pray away.